Aboard the Zarkonian command vessel Imperial Dominance, the holographic display of Earth pulsed with an almost insulting simplicity. Planetary data streams scrolled across the periphery, atmospheric composition, technological indicators, population statistics. Ambassador Krulak studied the readouts with a mixture of professional detachment and barely concealed contempt. The ship's xenobiological analysis team had spent decades studying humanity. Their reports were meticulous, clinical, and ultimately fatal in their miscalculation. Humanity appeared fragmented, technologically primitive, environmentally stressed, the perfect candidate for assimilation. "Prepare the standard diplomatic protocols," Krulak commanded, his voice a gravelly resonance that vibrated through the ship's bioorganic communication systems. Around him, junior officers moved with practiced efficiency, their exoskeletal armor glinting under the artificial illumination. The communication specialist, a junior-ranked Zarkonian named Vexinar, initiated the standard first contact transmission. Protocols dictated a clear, unambiguous message of surrender, followed by a demonstration of overwhelming force. It was a formula that had worked across 3 galactic quadrants, subduing over 200 species. What emerged from the communication array was neither a plea nor a negotiation. It was something entirely unexpected. Deep within the transmission's encrypted layers, something moved. Not a signal, not a message, but a living piece of code that began to unfurl like a predator awakening from hibernation. Vexnar's communication systems first flickered, then began to pulse with an impossible complexity. Algorithms that should have been linear began to branch, to grow, to mutate. The young Zarkonian's hands moved frantically across the control interface, but each attempt to shut down the system only seemed to accelerate its transformation. "Ambassador." Vexnar's voice carried a note of panic rarely heard among his disciplined species. "We're experiencing an unprecedented data intrusion." Krulak approached, his multiple optical sensors focusing on the rapidly changing display. What he saw defied everything in the Imperial xenological database. The human transmission was not just a message. It was a living system, adapting, learning, probing. Simultaneously, across a dozen planetary systems where Zarkonian scout ships and listening posts were stationed, similar incidents began to unfold. Communication arrays went dark. Navigational systems began to transmit conflicting, impossible coordinates. Defensive networks started to respond to threats that didn't exist, or worse, to threats that were just becoming real. On Earth, in a nondescript research facility buried beneath the Atacama Desert, a team of researchers watched the initial contact unfold. Dr. Miranda Chen, lead architect of Earth's first quantum defensive network, allowed herself the slightest smile. "First contact protocol is now in effect," she murmured to her team. "Initiate Phase 1. The Zarkonians had studied humanity's external signals, their broadcasts, their technological emissions, their surface-level conflicts. What they hadn't understood was the fundamental nature of human innovation. Humanity didn't just adapt. Humanity transformed." Back on the Imperial Dominance, Ambassador Krulak felt something he had not experienced in his centuries of diplomatic service: uncertainty. The transmission from Earth was no longer a simple message. It had become a living entity, a complex system that was simultaneously analyzing, infiltrating, and reconstructing the Zarkonian communication network. When the final fragment of the human transmission settled into the ship's systems, it carried a message that was more than words. It was a declaration, a warning, and a promise. Your approach has been calculated. Your strategy has been analyzed. Your outcome has been determined. In that moment, the first seed of genuine fear took root in the Zarkonian High Command. And this time, they knew exactly what was coming. The Atacama Desert Research Facility was more than a military installation. It was humanity's most closely guarded secret. Kilometers beneath the arid landscape, an entire ecosystem of technological innovation thrummed with potential energy. Dr. Miranda Chen moved through the facility's central hub, her augmented neural interface painting holographic data trails with each calculated step. Around her, a team of the most brilliant minds humanity had ever produced worked in perfect synchronization. They were not just scientists or engineers. They were architects of a species-wide survival strategy. Quantum entanglement integration at 97.3%, announced Dr. Kwame Osei, his fingers dancing across a multi-dimensional interface that would have looked like pure magic to any outside observer. Project Prometheus is moving beyond theoretical parameters. Miranda's augmented eyes, a blend of cutting-edge cybernetic engineering and biological optimization, scanned multiple data streams simultaneously. The project was more than a defense system. It was the culmination of humanity's most revolutionary leap, the complete integration of biological and technological potential. Decades of seemingly random technological developments now revealed their true purpose. The global push for quantum computing, the massive investments in distributed AI research, the subtle redirections of technological innovation across multiple disciplines, all of it had been part of a grand, virtually undetectable preparation. In a secured chamber adjacent to the main research hub, prototype systems that defied current scientific understanding waited in carefully maintained stasis. Nano-adaptive neural networks that could learn and evolve faster than any known intelligence. Quantum communication systems that could transmit information across seemingly impossible distances. Adaptive material technologies that could reconfigure themselves at the molecular level. We're receiving initial probe responses from the Zirconian Communication Network, a young researcher named Elena Rodriguez reported. Her voice carried a mix of scientific excitement and strategic calculation. The adaptive algorithms are moving beyond our initial predictive models. Miranda approached a holographic display that showed a living, breathing representation of humanity's technological defense. It wasn't a static system, but a dynamic, evolving organism. Each interaction with the Zirconian communication networks added layers of complexity of understanding. "They're studying us," Miranda murmured, "but they have no idea what they're looking at." The true genius of Project Prometheus wasn't its offensive capabilities. It was its ability to learn, to adapt, to understand an alien intelligence at a fundamental level that went beyond traditional computational models. Deep within the facility's most secure levels, experimental technologies pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. Quantum entanglement communication systems that could transmit information faster than light. Adaptive AI cores that could rewrite their own fundamental operational parameters in milliseconds. Nanotechnological systems that could reconstruct matter at the molecular level. Dr. Osei approached Miranda with a data tablet, his expression a mixture of scientific wonder and strategic calculation. The initial data suggests the Zirconian communication networks are fundamentally linear. They operate on predictive models that assume a certain level of technological sophistication. But we're introducing variables they can't comprehend. Miranda's smile was predatory. "We're not just preparing a defense. We're preparing a complete redefinition of technological warfare." The facility was more than a research center. It was the crucible where humanity was reforging its entire approach to survival. Every system, every algorithm, every piece of technology was interconnected, not just through physical networks, but through a living, breathing collective intelligence. Outside, the Atacama Desert stretched endlessly, a perfect camouflage for humanity's most important technological revolution. Satellite imagery would show nothing more than a research outpost. Deep ground scanning would reveal nothing of the complex networks beneath the surface. "Prometheus is ready," Elena announced, her voice cutting through the technological hum of the facility. "We're no longer just waiting. We're preparing to show the galaxy exactly what humanity is capable of." Miranda placed her hand on a central interface. The entire facility seemed to take a collective breath, like a predator preparing to strike. "Initiate full systems integration," she commanded. The hidden revolution was about to become very, very visible. Captain Eris Cole of the Zirconian Imperial battlecruiser Eternal Judgment had witnessed the subjugation of countless civilizations. His career was built on methodical conquest, a testament to the Imperium's technological superiority. The approach to Earth was supposed to be another routine pacification, a demonstration of overwhelming force that would crush any potential resistance before it could begin. The invasion fleet emerged from hyperspatial corridors in a carefully orchestrated formation. 10,000 ships, each a marvel of destructive engineering. Plasma cannons charged with enough energy to vaporize small moons. Quantum disruptors capable of unraveling molecular bonds. Gravitational warfare systems that could compress entire planetary cores. What happened next defied every strategic projection in Zarkonian military history. The first indication that something was wrong came from the fleet's forward reconnaissance units. Their quantum communication networks began to fragment, then collapse. It wasn't an attack. It was something far more terrifying. The very fabric of their technological infrastructure was being systematically dismantled. Report. Captain Cole barked, his multiple sensory appendages twitching with increasing agitation. Lieutenant Vexra's response was stuttering, uncertain, emotions never before heard in a Zarkonian military communication. Sir, our targeting systems, they're responding to threats that don't exist. No, that's not right. They're responding to threats that are about to exist. The ship's predictive combat algorithms went into overdrive, but instead of providing tactical advantages, they began to generate increasingly complex and increasingly impossible scenarios. Each potential attack vector folded in on itself, creating a recursive loop of strategic impossibility. Aboard the Eternal Judgment, holographic displays flickered with impossible data streams. Mathematical models of combat potential began to break down, replaced by something that looked more like living code than traditional warfare algorithms. Captain Cole realized, with a growing sense of existential dread, that they were no longer fighting a defensive system. They were confronting an intelligence. Across the fleet, similar incidents began to cascade. Weapon systems began to target their own vessels. Defensive networks generated impossible interference patterns. Communication channels became labyrinthine networks that twisted back on themselves, consuming information faster than it could be processed. In less than 17 minutes, the invasion became a self-destructive nightmare. Ships began to turn on each other. Quantum entanglement systems, designed to provide instantaneous communication, became vectors of systematic destruction. Each vessel's most advanced technologies became its most devastating weakness. The Eternal Judgment's bridge transformed into a scene of absolute chaos. Holographic interfaces writhed with living data. Tactical displays showed impossible geometries of conflict. Captain Cole watched in horror as his most advanced weapon systems began to predict and neutralize their own potential actions. "This is impossible," Lieutenant Vexra whispered, a statement of scientific impossibility rather than a cry of despair. But it was happening. 9,000 ships disappeared in a cascade of technological self-annihilation, not destroyed by external weapons, but consumed by their own predictive systems. Each vessel became a node in a rapidly evolving network of technological destruction. The remaining 1,000 ships fled, but fled was too organized a term. They scattered, their navigation systems producing random coordinates, their communication networks fragmenting into impossible data patterns. Deep within the Atacama Desert facility, Dr. Miranda Chen watched the entire engagement through a multi-dimensional tactical interface. Each destroyed Zarkonian vessel was more than a military victory. It was a message. First contact protocol. Phase 1. Complete, she murmured to her team. Aboard the few remaining Zarkonian vessels, something even more terrifying began to take shape. The human technological infection, for it was no longer just a system, but something closer to a living intelligence, began to spread. It wasn't just a defense. It wasn't just an attack. It was a fundamental redefinition of technological warfare. The galaxy would never be the same. The Zarkonian Collective Intelligence Hub, located on their central administrative planet of Kratax, was a marvel of distributed neural processing. Millions of interconnected minds worked in perfect synchronization, processing galactic information with machine-like precision. Until now. Dr. Aria Solarin watched the first wave of psychological warfare unfold from the Earth's Cognitive Warfare Research Center. She wasn't a military strategist in the traditional sense. Her expertise lay in the most complex battlefield of all, the landscape of consciousness itself. "Initiate Protocol Pandora," she commanded. What followed was not a traditional attack, but a carefully engineered assault on the very fabric of Zarkonian collective consciousness. The first wave arrived as seemingly innocuous data streams, fragments of human history, technological development logs, scientific breakthroughs, each piece meticulously crafted to create a specific psychological response. The Zarkonians had studied humanity from a distance, collecting vast amounts of data. Now, humanity would use that very data as a weapon. On Kraytax, the first signs of disruption began subtly. Zarkonian administrative units started experiencing cognitive dissonance. Historical records of their species' technological achievements began to shift, not dramatically, but in ways that created tiny fractures in their collective narrative. A transmission appeared in their primary communication networks. It wasn't a message of war, but a comprehensive breakdown of the Zarkonian invasion's tactical failures. Each ship's destruction was analyzed with clinical precision, revealing layers of strategic incompetence that had been hidden beneath their culture of military superiority. The truly insidious element was the transmission's origin. It appeared to come from multiple sources simultaneously: Zarkonian military archives, independent research institutions, even fragments of their own communication logs. Each piece of information was authentic, yet collectively they painted a devastating portrait of institutional failure. Admiral Krelvax, head of the Zarkonian Strategic Analysis Division, watched in growing horror. The data streams weren't just information. They were a systematic deconstruction of everything the Zarkonian civilization believed about itself. Images began to surface, not of human military might, but of human adaptability. A compilation of moments showing humans overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. A medical team developing a vaccine in record time. Engineers rebuilding a city after a natural disaster. Scientists solving complex problems with limited resources. Each image was a precision-guided psychological missile. The Cognitive Warfare Research Center was anything but a traditional military installation. Researchers from disciplines as diverse as neurolinguistics, memetic engineering, cultural anthropology, and advanced psychology worked in perfect synchronization. They weren't just attacking the Zarkonian military, they were dismantling their entire cultural narrative. "We're seeing the first signs of systemic breakdown," Dr. Solarin reported to her team. "Cognitive resilience is dropping by 0.03% per transmission cycle." It seemed minimal, but in a collective consciousness, 0.03% was seismic. Zarkonian planetary governors began to communicate in encrypted channels, their messages revealing growing uncertainty. Military units questioned previous strategic decisions. Research institutions started independent investigations into the failed invasion. The psychological warfare wasn't about destroying the Zarkonian civilization. It was about making them destroy themselves. Aria watched a holographic display showing the intricate web of information dispersal. Each data point was alive, adaptive, changing in real time based on the Zarkonian response. It was less a weapon and more a living organism of pure information. "They're starting to see themselves," she murmured. On Kraytax, the first public demonstrations began. Zarkonians, for the first time in their recorded history, began to question their own narrative of galactic supremacy. Small gatherings turned into larger protests. Military units began internal investigations. The Zarkonian collective was experiencing something unprecedented: doubt. And doubt, as Dr. Solarin knew, was the most powerful weapon humanity could deploy. The transformation of human civilization happened so quickly that most of its own population barely noticed. What appeared to be routine technological upgrades, industrial retooling, and academic research were actually the most comprehensive species-wide mobilization in galactic history. Deep within the Guyana Space Center, a facility that had once been dedicated to traditional space exploration. Dr. Elena Rodriguez oversaw the most ambitious technological integration project ever conceived. The facility was no longer just a launch site. It was the primary manufacturing hub for humanity's next-generation adaptive warfare systems. Orbital shipyards that had been hidden in plain sight began producing vessels that defied traditional concepts of spacecraft. These were not merely ships, but living technological organisms. Each vessel contained a distributed neural network that could adapt, learn, and evolve in real-time combat scenarios. The manufacturing process was itself a marvel of human innovation. Nano-adaptive construction systems could reconfigure entire production lines in minutes. Raw materials were broken down and reconstructed at the molecular level, with each component designed for maximum efficiency and adaptability. Global resources that had once been divided by national interests now flowed through a unified human network. Universities, research institutions, private corporations, and government agencies worked with a level of synchronization that would have been impossible just decades earlier. Dr. Rodriguez watched as the first of the new generation vessels took shape. Its hull was a living membrane of adaptive metamaterials, capable of changing its properties in milliseconds. Quantum communication systems were integrated directly into its structural matrix, making traditional concepts of ship-to-ship communication obsolete. The first adaptive battle group is ready for initial testing, announced Dr. Kwamosi, connecting remotely from the Atacama Desert facility. His holographic interface showed multiple data streams flowing simultaneously, each representing a different aspect of the vessel's capabilities. But this was more than just military preparation. Every aspect of human civilization was being transformed. Educational systems were rapidly retooled to produce the next generation of adaptive thinkers. Curriculum shifted to emphasize complex problem-solving, interdisciplinary thinking, and rapid technological adaptation. Schools became training grounds for a species preparing to redefine its place in the galaxy. Economic systems were restructured. Traditional market economies gave way to a more fluid, adaptive model that could rapidly redirect resources and innovation. Cryptocurrency systems developed by distributed AI networks created a global economic platform that was virtually immune to traditional manipulation. In major cities around the world, infrastructure began to change. Smart cities became living, breathing adaptive networks. Transportation systems, energy grids, communication networks, all were being transformed into interconnected, self-healing systems. The military was the most visible manifestation of this transformation, but it was just the tip of a much larger evolutionary process. Genetic research accelerated, not for enhancement or modification, but for understanding human potential. The human genome was studied not as a fixed code, but as an adaptive system capable of rapid learning and environmental response. Space habitats that had been theoretical projects became rapid response development zones. Lunar and Martian colonies were no longer just research outposts. They became forward deployment centers, each designed to be completely self-sufficient and rapidly adaptable. "We're not just preparing for a war," Dr. Rodriguez murmured to her team. "We're preparing for a fundamental transformation of our species." The adaptive battle groups represented more than military might. They were living proof of humanity's core strength, the ability to learn, to change, to survive. Each vessel contained multiple layers of technological integration. Quantum AI cores that could process information faster than any known biological or artificial intelligence. Adaptive hull materials that could reconfigure themselves to counter specific threats. Communication systems that could predict and neutralize potential interference before it occurred. But the most revolutionary aspect was the human element. These were not automated systems, but collaborative environments where human intuition and technological capability merged seamlessly. As the first adaptive battle group prepared for its initial testing, humanity held its collective breath. This was more than a military deployment. This was the moment the galaxy would remember forever. The first true counterattack began not with weapons, but with information. Commander Sarah Chen piloted the adaptive battle group's lead vessel, The U.S. Prometheus, from a neural interface that blurred the line between human consciousness and technological system. Her mind wasn't just controlling the ship, it was becoming the ship. The Zarkonian home systems had been weakened by the psychological warfare, but they were far from defeated. Their technological infrastructure remained formidable. A complex network of quantum communication relays, planetary defense grids, and adaptive AI systems that had conquered hundreds of civilizations. What they didn't understand was that humanity had been studying those very systems for decades. The initial approach was surgical. Quantum-encrypted viral algorithms began to infiltrate the Zarkonian network, not as traditional malware, but as living information ecosystems. Each viral packet was a complex organism of data, capable of adapting, learning, and spreading in ways that defied traditional computational models. Target acquisition complete. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez reported, his neural interface translating complex data streams into actionable intelligence. We're seeing complete systemic penetration in the outer communication networks. The U.S. Prometheus wasn't just a ship. It was a living weapon of pure information warfare. Zarkonian planetary defense systems began to experience impossible cascades of computational failure. Energy grids collapsed not through direct destruction, but through fundamental rewriting of their operational parameters. Communication networks turned into labyrinthine systems that consumed their own data faster than they could process it. On the bridge, Commander Chen witnessed the attack through a multi-dimensional holographic interface that looked more like a living ecosystem than a traditional tactical display. Each data point was a potential vector of attack, each communication channel a potential pathway of invasion. The truly devastating element was the precision. This wasn't indiscriminate destruction. This was a systematic dismantling of an entire civilization's technological infrastructure. Zarkonian military communication channels began to fragment. What appeared to be internal communications were actually carefully crafted narrative vectors, designed to create maximum psychological disruption. Military units received conflicting orders. Planetary governors found their communication networks compromised. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, watching from the Cognitive Warfare Research Center, described it as technological acupuncture, striking at the most vulnerable points of the Zarkonian systems with microscopic precision. Entire planetary defense networks began to turn against themselves. Weapon systems targeted their own infrastructure. Communication relays became self-consuming information vortexes. Each system's attempt to defend itself only accelerated its own destruction. The human counterattack wasn't about physical destruction. It was about fundamental system deconstruction. Adaptive battle groups moved through Zarkonian space like ghosts, barely registering on traditional sensor systems, yet capable of complete systemic infiltration. Each vessel was a distributed neural network, capable of processing and responding to threats in milliseconds. We're seeing complete systemic collapse in the Kravac sector, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported. Their quantum communication network is now functioning at less than 0.03% efficiency. Commander Chen's neural interface allowed her to perceive the attack in ways no traditional military commander ever could. She wasn't just observing the conflict. She was experiencing it as a living, evolving system. The Zarkonian High Command watched in growing horror as their most sophisticated defense systems became vectors of their own destruction. What had begun as a simple invasion had transformed into an existential threat to their entire civilization. "This isn't a war," Commander Chen murmured through her neural link. "This is a complete system reset." By the time the Zarkonian leadership realized the full extent of the attack, it was already too late. Their civilization's technological infrastructure had been systematically dismantled, not through brute force, but through the most sophisticated information warfare ever conceived. Humanity had done more than defeat an enemy. They had redefined the very concept of technological conflict. The Zarkonian High Council's emergency session was a scene of pure terror. Their most advanced communication systems were compromised. Their most secure facilities were being systematically dismantled by an intelligence they couldn't fight. Their final transmission was a broken plea. "What are you?" The human response was a single line of devastating simplicity. "We are survival incarnate." 2 years after the conflict, the transformation of galactic civilization became apparent to every sentient species. The Nexus Station, constructed at the precise gravitational midpoint between human and former Zarkonian territories, represented more than a diplomatic center. It was a living testament to a radical new approach to interstellar relations. Dr. Miranda Chen walked its central promenade, surrounded by representatives from dozens of galactic civilizations. Her augmented neural interface allowed her to process multiple simultaneous conversations, translating linguistic and cultural nuances in real time. The station itself was a marvel of adaptive architecture. Walls could reconfigure based on the physiological needs of different species. Environmental systems adjusted instantaneously to multiple biological requirements. It was less a structure and more a living organism of diplomatic potential. Humanity didn't conquer, she explained to a delegation of silicon-based life forms from the Orion cluster. We offered a fundamental reframing of potential existence. The Zarkonian civilization hadn't been destroyed. It had been transformed. Their most advanced minds were now integrated into collaborative research networks that spanned multiple species. Their technological infrastructure, once a tool of oppression, had become an open-source platform for collaborative innovation. Surrounding the Nexus Station, a new type of space emerged. Not a military buffer zone, but a collaborative research environment. Species that had been centuries-long enemies now worked on joint technological and ecological projects. Captain Sarah Chen, no relation to Miranda, but another architect of the new galactic paradigm, oversaw the first truly collaborative deep space exploration initiative. The U.S. Prometheus, once a weapon of unprecedented sophistication, now served as a mobile research platform. Its adaptive technologies were being shared, studied, and developed by a consortium of civilizations. The most radical transformation wasn't technological, it was philosophical. Humanity had introduced a revolutionary concept: civilization as an adaptive, learning system. Traditional models of territorial expansion, resource extraction, and military dominance were replaced by a more complex understanding of collective potential. Educational systems across multiple species were being redesigned. The emphasis shifted from competitive achievement to collaborative problem-solving. Technological development was no longer a zero-sum game, but a collective journey of discovery. On Earth, the Atacama Desert Research Facility that had been the birthplace of Project Prometheus was now a global education center. Researchers from every continent and multiple species studied the fundamental principles of adaptive intelligence. Dr. Kwame Osi, leading a mixed-species research team, demonstrated how the principles that had defeated the Zarkonian invasion could be applied to solving complex ecological challenges, medical innovations, and technological development. Conflict is simply unresolved potential, he would tell his students. Our job is to transform that potential into collaborative opportunity. The economic models that emerged were equally revolutionary. Traditional capitalist and communist frameworks gave way to adaptive resource allocation systems. Artificial intelligence and human intuition worked in concert to create economic models that prioritized collective advancement over individual accumulation. Technological development became a truly collaborative process. The quantum communication networks that had once been weapons now allowed instantaneous knowledge sharing across multiple species. A breakthrough in medical research on one side of the galaxy could be implemented on another within moments. The Zarkonian representative to the Nexus Council, once a military leader named Krelvax, now led initiatives for cross-species technological collaboration. His transformation became a powerful symbol of the new galactic potential. "We were not conquered," he often said in public addresses. "We were invited to evolve." Surrounding the Nexus Station, a new type of space emerged. Adaptive habitats that could support multiple species simultaneously. Research platforms that merged technological and biological innovation. Diplomatic centers that were living, breathing entities of potential communication. Commander Sarah Chen, Watching a holographic display showing collaborative research projects spanning multiple star systems, understood the true nature of their achievement. "We didn't win a war," she murmured to her neural interface. "We created a platform for collective potential." The universe had changed, not through conquest, but through a fundamental reimagining of what collective existence could mean. Humanity had done more than survive. They had shown a path to a different kind of civilization.